A domestic flight in China took off into a peaceful evening in 2002. No storms were forecast, no technical problems reported. Yet just a few minutes later, the plane suddenly caught fire in midair and disappeared from the radar screen. What exactly happened inside the passenger cabin? Was it an accident, or a plan set in motion long before? This is the story of China Northern Airlines Flight 6136, a disaster that shook the entire Chinese aviation industry. So, what really happened? Let's find out together. 7 p.m. May 7, 2002. At Beijing Capital International Airport, one of the busiest and most important aviation hubs in the world, operations were running as usual. Hundreds of flights took off and landed every day, transporting tens of thousands of domestic and international passengers. At Terminal 1T1, the atmosphere was tense and busy. Engineers and ground staff of China Northern Airlines were finishing the final preparations for a regular commercial flight, flight number CJ6136. According to the schedule, the aircraft was set to depart from Beijing and fly northeast to Dalian Zhoushuizi International Airport, about 520 kilometers away. With favorable weather conditions, the journey was expected to take around 1 hour and 20 minutes, an ordinary flight in every sense. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, registration number B2138. It was a narrow-body, twin-engine jet manufactured by the American company McDonnell Douglas, and delivered to China Northern Airlines in 1991. By this time, it had accumulated more than 27,000 flight hours. However, this same MD-82 had experienced 2 serious security incidents in the past. Both incidents occurred in 1993, and coincidentally, in both cases, the aircraft was forced to divert to Taipei, Taiwan, instead of landing in Fuzhou as originally planned. The first incident took place on November 12, 1993. During a flight from Changchun to Fuzhou, 2 Chinese passengers carrying scalpels and fake bombs threatened the crew, demanding the plane be diverted to Taiwan. The aircraft later landed safely in Taipei, and all 82 people on board survived without injury. Less than a month later, on December 8, 1993, the same MD-82 became a target once again. This time, on a flight from Qingdao to Fuzhou, a Chinese passenger attacked and injured a flight attendant, claiming to have a bomb on board. Once again, the aircraft was forced to divert to Taipei, landing safely with 137 people on board, and in both incidents, no bombs were ever found. Although it had faced several life and death incidents in the past, by 2002, the aircraft was still rated as having an excellent maintenance record. Before this fateful flight, it had undergone a routine technical inspection, been fully refueled, and met all safety standards required for a normal commercial operation. In charge of operating flight CJ6136 was a 9-member crew from China Northern Airlines. The captain, Wang Yongchang, aged 35, was a veteran pilot with over 11,000 flight hours, widely respected among colleagues for his composure and mastery of the MD-82. Seated in the first officer's seat was Chen Suman, aged 29, one of the airline's most promising young pilots, who had already logged more than 3,300 flight hours and consistently achieved outstanding results in regular evaluations. Serving as the flight engineer, responsible for monitoring all technical systems throughout the journey, was Fan Minzi, aged 25, with 4,980 hours of flying experience. Alongside the crew, 103 passengers, mostly Chinese citizens, were also on board. In total, there were 112 people on board the aircraft during that ill-fated flight. 8 p.m. The China Northern Airlines McDonnell Douglas MD-82 had completed all the necessary preparations. Technicians had just finished the routine technical inspection. The fuel tanks were topped up, and the plane was fully ready for tonight's journey. Passengers began boarding, quickly finding their seats and settling in. Inside the cabin, a quiet, peaceful atmosphere hung in the air. Some chatted excitedly about upcoming business trips or vacations, while others rested their heads against the seats, taking a moment to relax before takeoff. Among them, a man sat alone, quietly, in the last row on the left, right by the window. The 3 seats around him were completely empty, giving him a sense of isolation, a spot few passengers chose. Being close to the engines, where the noise was louder and the vibrations stronger than elsewhere. What drew attention was that he clutched a backpack tightly on his lap, unusual behavior for a commercial flight, where passengers are normally instructed to stow their carry-on in the overhead bins. A few flight attendants noticed this, but with nothing obviously wrong, they carried on with their usual pre-flight preparations. 8:22 p.m. local time. Flight CJ6136 pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, preparing for takeoff. At 8:37 p.m., the MD-82 accelerated down the runway, lifted off, and began its 520-kilometer journey toward Zhouxuizi International Airport in Dalian. By 9:15 p.m., about 40 minutes after takeoff, the plane had stabilized at a cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, preparing to enter Dalian airspace. According to the schedule, it was set to land at 9:40 p.m., only 25 minutes away. At this stage, the flight crew had completed nearly all the landing preparations. They were simply waiting for final instructions from air traffic control to begin the descent. Inside the passenger cabin, everything was calm. The flight attendants, though taking a brief rest, remained alert as required. Everything was proceeding normally, with no signs of any problems. Yet, no one on board could have guessed that just a few rows behind, a terrifying danger was quietly taking shape. 9:18 p.m. After noticing that no one was paying attention, the man sitting alone in the very last row began to act. From his backpack, he pulled out a plastic bottle filled with gasoline, cleverly disguised to look just like an ordinary water bottle. There were still 2 more bottles like it in his backpack. And then, as the plane flew high above the ground, carrying over 100 people inside, he began to put his plan into motion. Without a moment's hesitation, the man stood up, opened the bottle, and poured gasoline all over the rear cabin floor. The next step, he took out a box of matches and struck a flame. And then, a fire erupted almost instantly. In just a few seconds, it spread to everything around, turning the rear of the plane into a wall of fire. What made it even more terrifying was that the McDonnell Douglas MD-82 used on today's flight wasn't equipped with a smoke detection system. So, the crew had no idea that a raging fire was unfolding right behind them. Soon after, thick black smoke quickly filled the passenger cabin. People jolted awake in panic. Many passengers rushed toward the front to escape the smoke. The flight attendants tried to reach the burning area, but were powerless. The smoke was too dense, and the strong smell of gasoline made it hard to breathe and dizzy. Some passengers tried to grab oxygen masks, but the situation kept getting worse. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the crew began noticing unusual drops in cabin pressure. System warnings flashed continuously, signaling serious faults. The captain immediately contacted Dalian Air Traffic Control.
Dalian, this is CJ6136. We have an emergency. The plane is on fire in the rear. Smoke is extremely thick. The tail is burning. Requesting immediate emergency landing.
On the ground, the response was swift.
CJ6136. This is Dalian. Message received. You are cleared to descend to 8,000 feet. Weather is good. Please provide more details on your current situation. If you require any further assistance, report immediately.
The crew followed instructions and began descending, doing everything they could to bring the plane safely back to the airport. But now, the fire had grown completely out of control. It spread through the cabin floor, burning into the maintenance bay below, the area that housed the control cables for the aircraft's tail and the fuel lines. with the engines mounted at the rear. If the flames reached those lines, the entire aircraft would stand no chance of survival. Back in the cockpit, as the pilots prepared to land, the autopilot suddenly disconnected. They were forced to take manual control. The captain tried to bank the aircraft toward the runway, and that's when a series of piercing alarms blared through the cockpit. The bank angle had exceeded the safety limit. They quickly realized the tail section was barely responding. The main flight control systems had been destroyed by the fire. Inside the cabin, thick smoke filled the air. Panic and screams echoed everywhere. Some passengers collapsed from suffocation. The temperature kept rising, and the air was heavy with the stench of burning fuel and scorched metal. Moments later, the entire tail control system failed. The plane could no longer maintain its balance or change direction. Warning lights flashed all across the cockpit, and the central computer shut down completely. Flight CJ6136 had entered a state of total loss of control. 9:24 p.m. On the radar screens of air traffic control, the signal from flight CJ6136 suddenly disappeared. The McDonnell Douglas MD-82 plunged into the sea at a nearly 90-degree angle at tremendous speed. All 112 people on board did not survive. The journey that was less than 10 minutes away from landing ended in tragedy. Over the waters off the coast of Dalian. Immediately after the disaster, the Chinese government swiftly launched a large-scale investigation. A special commission was established, consisting of representatives from Chinese authorities and the United States National Transportation Safety Board, to jointly investigate and analyze the cause of the crash. At first, investigators focused on the theory that an in-flight fire had caused the flight crew to lose control of the aircraft. This assumption was based on the final distress call from the cockpit. Along with eyewitness accounts from the ground, people who reported seeing the aircraft circling several times before suddenly plunging into the sea. At the crash site, rescue teams discovered a catering cart that had been completely burned, a detail that immediately reinforced suspicions that the fire originated inside the passenger cabin. Some preliminary reports also mentioned the possibility of an electrical short circuit, which could have sparked the sudden fire in the rear section of the fuselage. But then, the official investigation report was released, and it sent shockwaves across China. The crash of Flight CJ6136 was not an accident. It was an act of deliberate sabotage. The culprit was a passenger named Zhang Pilin, who had brought gasoline on board and deliberately set the fire, causing the MD-82 to lose all control and plunge into the sea. According to the investigation, Zhang Pilin was a middle-aged businessman, married, with children, and ran his own company. But behind that seemingly stable appearance was a collapsing life, mounting debts, a failing business, and a desperate future. Just days before Flight CJ6136, Zhang began showing strange behavior, hinting at a carefully planned act of desperation. He had purchased multiple air insurance policies totaling nearly $200,000, naming his family members as beneficiaries. Along with that, he carried 3 plastic bottles filled with gasoline, disguised as bottled water to slip through airport security. Once on board, Zhang deliberately chose a seat at the back of the cabin, near the engines, a spot few people noticed, and even fewer wanted to sit in. At the crash site, investigators found heavy traces of gasoline around Zhang's seat. Forensic reports later confirmed that most passengers died from carbon monoxide poisoning, a deadly gas produced by the fire. Since the blaze was an act of deliberate arson, insurance companies refused to pay any compensation. Zhang's family, who thought they would receive financial support after his death, received nothing. Flight CJ6136 of China Northern Airlines thus became one of the most tragic air disasters in modern Chinese history, and one of the very few plane crashes in the world officially determined to be caused by a passenger's deliberate act of sabotage. The tragedy of Flight CJ6136 is not just a story about an arson in the sky. It's a haunting reminder of the true value of human life. Out of desperation and blind ambition, one man destroyed the lives of more than 100 innocent people who were simply on their way home or traveling for work, just like any other ordinary day. This loss cannot be measured in money, nor can it be redeemed with late apologies or regret. It reminds us that every life in the sky is its own world, and that every decision, even one made in a fleeting moment, can forever alter the fate of hundreds. In today's world, where traveling has become easier than ever before, aviation safety is not only the responsibility of pilots or engineers, it also begins with the awareness, compassion, and mindfulness of every single passenger. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.